Hi, I'm Dr. Beth Molleson.
And I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
Thanks for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. These are short conversations where we chat informally about relevant topics in vet med. And today we are going to shine a light on the relationship between general practitioners and their ER doctors or specialists in the area, that referral relationship. So this topic came about because Dr. Alyssa found a Facebook post that was kind of discussing this relationship, and we thought it would be fun to kind of dive into those dynamics because, of course, there's a lot there sometimes. And I want to acknowledge that, of course, we're both coming more from that general practitioner side of things, so we don't have the voice of the specialist here, but I think there's still some good things we can discuss because we can, try to see that relationship from all angles. So, Alyssa, do you mind kicking us off by kind of telling us what you saw going on in that Facebook post?
Yeah, so the thing that struck me about this post was that the kind of different approaches about, especially, and we're going to talk a little bit in the episode about how possibly things have changed post-pandemic and when people are so, clinics are so strapped for time and possibly understaffed, about how that relationship has changed. But the big focus of this particular post was about just calling to when you're transferring, and this idea that sometimes the ER or the specialty center wants you to call and fill them in and give them all the information. But and this was very surprising to me, several people said that they had the opposite experience, that the specialty center or the ER didn't want them to call, literally got kind of a response back like, yeah, we're the ER, we're open, send it, why are you even calling me? Which I found very surprising, and certainly is not the experience that I have had, dealing with several different local ER clinics, as well as, our critical care here in Las Vegas that's open, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I've always had a very good response when I call and speak with, and even if the doctor's not available, which I totally understand, even speaking, with one of the licensed technicians, or, just giving them a heads up that case is coming over. And so it just surprised me. And so that was why I wanted to have the conversation with you. How do you feel? Do you feel like that kind of dynamic or relationship has changed in your 10, how long have you been practicing now, Dr. Beth?
That's a great question. I think almost 12 years, but
Well,
we don't need to focus on that number. Um, yeah, I think you raise a lot of good points, and I do honestly really think that a lot of it did seem to flip at the time of the pandemic. And of course, when we say pandemic, I think what we're really talking about is when so many resources were bottlenecked for so long. Because I think so much of that relationship comes down to people having time for communication, time to see the pets that you're referring, um, emotional bandwidth to, be cordial and polite and take on that relationship. And I do really feel like a lot of that changed at the pandemic. I have heard general practitioners in the area talk about how, of course, with the long ER wait times, sending a patient to the ER because they really felt like their patient needed support, and then that ER not being able to see that patient in the 10 overnight hours and just getting that patient back in the morning with no care. I think that, as you can imagine, can be frustrating to a general practitioner, but at the same time, when resources are limited, there's not really much that ER specialty center can do about it. So I think that's just like one example of the way things have changed. I've also heard GPs talk about referring a patient, hope say an internal medicine case, hoping that internist would take on that case only to kind of have it be triaged and received back because that internist doesn't have appointments to really manage that case. And I think all of those things start to kind of wear on that relationship. And, going back to your discussion about calling, those ERs. I could see how suddenly that phone call that no one thought twice about before these resource bottlenecks, people just would pick up the phone and happily talk to you. You can imagine when you're under so much intense stress that phone call suddenly takes on more weight and does become a contentious point. So yeah, I can see how things really have changed in that time period. Do you feel the same way? I mean, you've been practicing a while too.
Yep, yep. I absolutely feel that way. And I think another place a lot of misunderstandings come into play is listening or taking the word of the client for what was said,
Hmm.
by either the ER or by the specialist, instead of, talking directly to that person. And so that's a place where I personally feel like starting off the relationship with a quick phone call, again, just reaching out, even if you don't actually talk to them,
Hmm.
and it's tough because we talk so much about boundaries and everything. This is a place where early in my career, I remember when I first started practicing, the overnight ER clinic in town, they had a separate number for veterinarians where we could
Wow.
call. Yeah. So, and it
Hmm.
would still ring through even after their main line was closed. So in the morning at 8 a.m. when they closed and transferred the patients back to us, if I had a question, I just
Hmm.
called the after hours line and somebody picked up, or I had the numbers for the doctors that were, that I just had their cell phone number, and that's something I did all the time too. I said, I'm like, I'm leaving, the clinic, I'm calling to transfer, but the clinic phone has turned off. Here's my cell phone
Hmm.
number,
Hmm.
because I want that receiving doctor to have the information and not to have to repeat tests or something like that if
Right.
there's something that we've already done. There's other times where I've had things like blood samples and I've just called to ask and been like, do you want this? And I've got
Hmm.
a lavender top, I've got some urine here, do you want me to send it? Do you want me to send it out to Antec and or IDEX or whatever lab you use and have it forwarded to you? And so I think oftentimes just the act of reaching out can sometimes help mitigate any hard feelings or misunderstandings, especially when it comes to the client questioning why they
Hmm.
might have to repeat tests or something like that. I don't know.
Right.
Have you had that
Yeah.
experience?
I completely agree. I feel like that little bit of communication can go a long way, not just for that relationship between the GP and the ER doctor or specialist, but also for that pet owner. Like you mentioned, having to rely on that pet owner's word of mouth, I think can get all parties in a lot of trouble. If the primary history of what's been done at the GP going to the ER is coming from that pet owner, I think a lot of miscommunication can happen. Even if you're coming with the printed out blood work, whatever the case might be. I also think it damages that vet to client relationship, because they're not getting that streamlined care. They might feel the frustration from the clinic. They might feel that frustration in the room when the clinic doesn't know exactly what's going on with the case. So I'm with you. I feel like a little bit of communication through that phone call can go a long way, but I think it goes back to our point of, if the staff simply doesn't have time for that phone call, then that phone call that was meant to bridge that communication barrier suddenly becomes a contention point. I think another interesting thing is, I almost feel like the dynamic was flipped a little bit when everyone got so busy and there was a surplus of patients, where, at least in my area, I feel like the um, and specialty center kind of looked at all of us GPs as the hands that fed them, so to speak. We were the ones that referred patients. We were where they got their business. Suddenly they have so much business, they don't know what to do with it, that, like, you know, that dynamic really shifted. I know that was hard for a lot of specialists in my area, because from upper management, they are given guidelines on how to treat the general practitioners. You need to call after every patient. You see kind of that same mentality of, these general practitioners are almost your clients in some way, and you need to wine
Mhm.
and dine them a little bit with extra communication. I think they really felt the pressure of that when they were so busy and felt like upper management was trying to get involved and manage that relationship. So yeah, there's a lot to it, especially again when stressors are high.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even really think of it from that standpoint that the ER doctor or the specialist might have, a protocol set in place by their practice that mandated how that communication takes place. And everybody likes to communicate differently. I am a phone call person. And I fully respect the fact that that is changing in our society, and that so many people I saw a meme the other day that was like, ways to get a hold of me, and it was like number 1, text, number 2, email, number 3, DM, and then like it went all the way down to like 49, carrier pigeon, 50, call. And
That was
like
not
and
written by
and
a Gen
so many
Xer.
people were like, "Oh yes, absolutely, 100%. Like I don't want to get on the phone." And I feel like this odd person out that I am like, I cannot stand communicating by text. Email is okay, but I would much rather get on the phone and talk to you because I feel like we can have a more direct conversation. I can answer your questions faster.
Mhm.
And so I understand that some of this may be, how I approach this may be my personality,
Mhm.
and that, what seems so obvious to me might not be the best way or so obvious to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's funny because you're really showing your Gen X there, Alyssa. I'm more of the I would say, except I'm with you when it comes to work. Like I would much rather talk to clients on the phone. I would much rather, yeah, communicate with specialist ear doctors on the phone. Otherwise, I'm a big texter. But anyway, I think, like you're saying, I know I have heard specialists say, we are conditioned to call general practitioners after we see their patients. But so oftentimes we can tell that they're too busy to be talking and they don't want us calling in the middle of the day and bothering them. But other people feel like they're not getting the, service or respect or communication they need if they don't call. So I think, they're in a bad position too, where you're trying it's the same way when we're dealing with clients. Everyone wants something a little bit different, so it's hard to come in with just a blanket approach. And I think this brings us to the point of, have we ever really asked? It makes me wonder, in all my time, have I ever asked if they want me to call, or have I ever, you know, uh, could we benefit from more of like a standard on, here's how, whether it's an industry wide standard or even just with that local referral center. I don't know. Do you feel like you've asked the specialists and ERs you work with?
No, absolutely not. I feel like it's just I've kind of just adapted over time. Certainly one thing that I have noticed that our local, specialty center in critical care has kind of transferred, I guess, over to us, which we never used to do, what was discussing cost. And I get why, because I prep somebody to go over there, they show up, they get triaged, they take up all this time, and sometimes they
Mhm.
had no idea how much it was going to cost. And I'll tell you, I'm bad at estimating our own clinic's costs. I'm like, I'm going to go make an estimate in the computer because I'm bad at this.
Right.
And so I need to put these things in the computer. So the last thing I want to do is estimate charges at a completely different, clinic or specialty hospital where I have absolutely no idea what the fee structure is.
Mhm.
Um, and so for a while, I was, I guess, frustrated or a little bit put off that I'm like, now you've got me talking about your fees. Like, I hate talking
Right.
about our own fees. Now you've got me
Right.
talking about your fees. But at the same time, I get it.
Mhm.
And so that is one thing that I have noted and have now built into my conversation with clients, and another reason that I do like to call, even if I don't get a hold of the doctor, even if I can just talk to a technician or a receptionist, and I can be like, I've got an ITP dog with 0 platelets. and, I think might need a transfusion. Can you just like
Mhm.
give me a ballpark for these people so they know whether or not it's even, in the cards for them to drive
Right,
across town? Right.
right. I That's interesting because I think you're right. I think the majority of times I do feel like there has been that messaging of, you need to give them some estimate so they know whether or not to come, but at the same time, I feel like I have called and asked for estimates and gotten that little bit of pushback of like, the estimate can vary so much, that kind of like frustration that I think we all get when someone calls on the phone for an estimate and we
Hmm.
don't know. But you're right. I think that's a good rule of thumb, is to try to make sure that everybody's on the same page before referring a patient, whether for ER or for specialty, about cost, because that can save a lot of time and communication issues, I think, for everybody involved. But yeah, it does make me feel like, and I wonder too, if we were to call up our local ERs and say, what is your process for having it makes me wonder if everyone in that facility is on the same page, if they have
Hmm.
thought about it, if they have standardized it, and if it's just us that doesn't know what the standard is. So yeah, it's certainly interesting. Do you feel like, I know we talked so much about the resource bottlenecks.
Hmm.
I feel like there's been a surge of these urgent care places that are opening
Hmm.
up, which I feel like that will be interesting to see how that relationship develops too, between GPs and these urgent care facilities, and how that changes the whole dynamic across the industry.
Yep, it's funny that you bring that up because there's one opening this summer here in Las Vegas. And so it's I'm really interested to see what it is, because definitely there are things like, he vomited twice, or an ear infection that's really probably been going on for a week, but it's an emergency now because the dog's like scratching at it so much that it's bleeding, those things where we've had real issues in GP, getting them in a timely manner. But is it really something that needs to go to the ER and take up, their time and resources when they actually really do have very critical, patients? And so they are starting this, they are opening one of these urgent cares here in Las Vegas. They're doing the hours, I think, during the week are going to be like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and
Mhm.
then open, most of the day, Saturday and Sunday, which like I'm sure they put it in there for that. This is the after work, time in most places, but there's really no such thing in Vegas because we're like a 24-hour town.
That's right.
I used to get calls all the time when I still took call. I used to get calls all the time at like 2 or 2:30 in the morning,
Oh my
because
gosh.
that was like the end of the swing shift,
People
right? And
coming
that was
home.
when
Yeah.
everybody was getting home from
Yeah.
the casinos and from, waiting and the restaurants and everything.
Yeah. Not a good city to work on call, Alyssa.
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy place. But if you could get past that and like all those people went into work at 3 a.m., then you were golden. And
That's right. Oh, that's funny. Well, maybe the moral of our story here should be, we should all take the 2 minutes to communicate about communication. And next time we're on
communicate
the
about
phone
communication.
with our ER or specialist, just give them a quick question of, how do you prefer that we communicate? How can we streamline this? So, anyway, Alyssa, I think that brings us to our win of the week. Have you had any wins this week?
Yeah, I did. I had, uh, so I always feel kind of like, um, happy, sad when my win of the week has to do with one of my end of life
Mm-hmm.
patients. But this win of the week did have to do with one of my end of life patients. So, I had an appointment scheduled for a little dog, and the dog's name was spelled Cylie, and it was a little female dog. And so I called the owner and I said I was on my way. I always call them when I'm about 20 minutes away to let them know when I'll be there. And, obviously, for the vast majority of these patients, unless I've seen them for like a quality of life consult, this is the first time I'm meeting them. And
Mm-hmm.
so I assumed this dog's name was pronounced Kylie.
Mhm.
Cyle, but it was actually Siley.
Hmm.
And so, and the owner said, oh, actually it's Siley. And then I felt a little bad because I never want to mispronounce, an animal's name in that situation. And so, but then when I got there, I walked up to the house and they had a huge Iowa State Cyclones flag. And that's what the
Oh,
dog was named after, the Cyclones. That was
how
our
cute.
mascot, Cy. And so, when I, opened the door and the owner asked me in, I asked right away. I
What
was
are
like,
the
is
odds?
she named after Cy? And they said yes. And then we had a big tie, and I said I went to Iowa State. That's where I went to vet school. And it ended up just being like this really beautiful appointment. It was my last appointment of the day, and I was probably there for, over an hour, but it was a beautiful appointment. And the owners told me stories about how they had taken her to Iowa State, and
Oh my
it ended up
gosh.
being really gorgeous.
I was gonna say, what are the odds
I
of that
know.
in Vegas? Yeah, that's pretty cool. I bet
Yeah,
that brought them a lot of joy
it
and
did.
those dark moments, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, good news is mine is not quite as sad, Alyssa. That made me tear up a little bit. Um, my win is that I survived my kindergarten presentation last week. So my daughter is in kindergarten. I had told Alyssa about this, but I was they asked me to come present about being a vet. And so I thought it was just going to be to like her. I think there's 24 kids in her class, which is already a lot of kids for me. But it turns out it was to all 100 kids in kindergarten. So I had to do a 30-minute presentation. They bundled them in groups of 50. So I had two classrooms full of kids. We did a presentation. It actually went pretty well. The teachers helped keep all the kids in line. They, of course, had phenomenal questions that were hysterical, but also like very intelligent questions too. They got a kick. I brought some teeth, like extracted teeth. They got a kick out of that. Showed them a lot of x-rays. And yeah, it was just, it went really well. I was admittedly very nervous about it. So anyway, it was fun. My daughter was very excited I was there. They all the real win is they wrote me the most adorable thank you notes. They each wrote a little note with like a drawing on it.
Mhm.
My daughter said like, "Thanks for coming, mommy. I wish you came to school every day with me." So anyway, it was just a very sweet moment. I think those are the moments that we all have to savor
Yes.
as a vet.
Absolutely, 100%. And I knew that you were going to do great when you told me that you were doing it. So, but oh, that's wonderful. That's so great. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad that, Quinn was happy that you were there. I bet she was so proud of you.
I was gonna say that she's sassy, so honestly, it wouldn't have surprised me if she was like annoyed that I was crashing her classroom. So I should just be thankful that she was nice and sweet about it. But anyway, big win. So, well, I think that wraps us up. So to our audience, thank you so much for listening in today, and we will catch you guys next time in the break room. Thank you for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including the video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcasts, or drop us a line at podcasts@vetmedics.com. Veterinary Breakroom is a Vetmedics production, produced by Alexis Ussery and co-hosted by Dr. Alyssa Watson and Dr. Beth Molleson.